My name is Margaret Raymond, and I'm the Dean of the Law School here at the University of Wisconsin. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 27th Fairchild Lecture. This lecture commemorates Judge Fairchild, and ordinarily I would take some time and tell you something about the judge, but today I think our speaker is going to take care of that. So I'm going to leave it to the talk to educate you further about Judge Fairchild's legacy, but I do want to welcome all of the judge's law clerks who are joining us here today. Actually, if all of them would either stand up or wave or let us know you're here. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And we at the law school very much appreciate the former clerks of Judge Fairchild who join us for this event and who support it. Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to welcome one of that number who is our speaker this year, Nils Olson. Do they call you professor or dean or all of the above?
All the above.
Okay. Professor.
Mostly Nils.
Nils and I have many points of contact. First, he is a graduate of this university for his undergraduate degree. He did his law degree at Columbia University, from which I also hold my JD. And third, he did time, oh, that's probably not the way to say it. He spent time as a law school dean at the State University of New York at Buffalo Law School, where he excelled first as a clinical teacher and then as a dean, which role he played from 1998 until 2007. I understand that he will retire in May and wish him many wonderful opportunities on the next steps in his journey, which I am delighted to say will bring him back to Wisconsin. So we will look forward to having him here as a friend and colleague, at least somewhere in the state. But his very next step in his journey is to present his talk to us today. Please join me in welcoming Nils Olson.
Thank you, Dean Raymond. Ordinarily, I wouldn't be bound to the podium like this. I like to wander around, but I'm afraid this is lengthy enough that if I don't follow my text, I'll be in trouble. I'm somewhat technologically limited, so hopefully the technology will work. I've spent a lot of time in the archives and on the internet and have, I think, hopefully a well-illustrated talk as well. Rarely in life can you say that your first experience was your best. For me, although my clerkship with Tom Fairchild was my first legal experience in an otherwise privileged legal career, I can also say that it was my very best experience. And so in honor of that experience and the man who made it possible, I thought it appropriate to focus my remarks in this lecture on the life of Judge Fairchild. But recognizing that the unique family tradition of judicial and political engagement of the Fairchilds of Wisconsin, which I think is probably exceeded only by that of the Lavallettes, perhaps, made it appropriate to consider both Edward and Thomas Fairchild, as obviously much of Tom Fairchild's career grew out of his father's first career, and his father, in his own right, was quite a remarkable man. So our story begins in the, if you turn the lights down, in the hardscrabble western Pennsylvania town of Towanda on June 17, 1872, with the birth of Edward T. Fairchild. At the age of 5, Edward moved with his family to the lovely western New York village of Dansville, which is within about 40 miles of Rochester, so not that far from where my family lives. Edward was one of 8 members of the first class to graduate from the Dansville High School. Believe it or not, I found, these are postcards that I found on eBay. In 1890, he graduated. He had no further formal education. He worked first as a part-time teacher, a bookkeeper in a hardware store, and a newspaper man. Edward then clerked in the law office of Rowe and Coyne and passed the New York State Bar and was admitted to practice in Buffalo in 1894. That's Edward at around that time. He practiced law in Dansville for 3 years, then moved to the bright lights and big city of Milwaukee. His first office was in a vacant room in the old Sentinel building, which was formerly the law offices of Kleist, Bennett, and Churchill. Bennett plays an important role in his life. He was a prominent citizen who was elected to the Milwaukee County District Attorney in 1900. Edward was influenced in his decision to relocate to Wisconsin by the fact that his mother's brother, Dr. Amos Keel, was the pastor of Milwaukee's Calvary Presbyterian Church. My wife said I was showing too many buildings. He roomed with his uncle until acquiring his first major client, the inelegantly named Milwaukee Tallow and Grease Company. He then moved in with Captain Merriman, a retired Great Lakes ship's captain who ran a boarding house. And significantly, one of his fellow boarders was a Mike Laffey, who was active in politics and who served in the Wisconsin State Assembly as a Republican. In 1900, the 4th Ward of Milwaukee was electing a delegate to the Milwaukee County Republican Convention. Mike Laffey encouraged Edward to serve. He ended up seconding Bennett's nomination for district attorney. In 1900, Edward was rewarded for his support and was appointed second assistant district attorney by Bennett. This position provided sufficient economic security to permit Edward to return to Dansville and marry his high school sweetheart, Helen McCurdy Edwards. The local paper described the nuptials as one of the prettiest weddings that was ever celebrated in the village, with the Presbyterian church filled with 500 invited guests, so you can see why he needed a good job. There's the Presbyterian church in Dansville. The couple had 5 children, 3 of whom, James, Helen, and Elizabeth, died in infancy. Ann Edwards Fairchild Carter, who became a missile design engineer for the Navy, was their first child, and Tom was their 4th. Edward served in the DA's office until 1906, when he left to join Frank Lenachek and Frank Bosel, who was also an adjunct faculty member of the University of Wisconsin Law School. Bosel was a lifelong friend and best man at Edward's wedding. That's how law professors used to look. Together they formed the law firm of Lenachek, Fairchild, and Bosel. Edward's political career began in 1904 when he unsuccessfully ran for the Republican nomination for district attorney. In 1906, he was elected to the state senate and served 2 sessions. While a state senator, he developed what was to become a lifelong interest in vocational training. He chaired a committee that studied the need for vocational education and resulted in a law establishing continuation schools under the State Board of Vocational Education. Edward also played an instrumental role in the sponsorship and drafting of Wisconsin's workmen's compensation law, first in the nation. In politics, Edward was a conservative, stalwart Republican. He had close personal friendships with Charles Pfister, the Republican leader of the time, and with wealthy businessmen Emanuel Philip and Walter Kohler, both later elected governor. As his legislative record makes clear, however, he was firmly committed to government providing support to those challenged by personal hardship. Indeed, Edward helped people throughout his life. He was active in organizing Milwaukee's community welfare organization and the Milwaukee Urban League. In 1909, Friends organized a committee to encourage Edward to run for mayor. News accounts in the Milwaukee Free Press quote his supporters. Edward Schwarm, an electrical engineer, explained, "Mr. Fairchild is popular with the laboring men. Fairchild is fair and honest. He is intelligent and can make a good speech. He isn't stuck up. He has many warm friends in all parts of the city." These efforts, however, never came to fruition. The stalwarts, who by this time were engaged in annual conflict with Robert La Follette Sr.'s Progressive Republicans, were in need of a gubernatorial candidate for the Republican primary. Edward ran. You may notice this one is in German. Edward ran but was defeated by Francis McGovern. Edward was a representative of the William Howard Taft wing of the National Republican Party, while McGovern was a La Follette and Teddy Roosevelt progressive. Edward was elected to the state senate once again in 1914. Missing his law practice, he resolved to re-enter private life. However, stalwart Republican Governor Emanuel Philipp, his friend, whom he served as floor leader, asked him to delay his departure. And in September 1916, Governor Philipp appointed Edward to the Circuit Court of Milwaukee County. He was elected to retain his position in 1917 and twice thereafter. On April 30th, 1930, Edward was appointed by Governor Kohler to a position on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. He became Chief Justice on January 4th, 1954. I got behind. It has been estimated conservatively that during his career, Edward participated in more than 8,000 appeals and authored more than 1,000 majority opinions. Edward was the last justice on the Wisconsin Supreme Court who attended neither college nor law school. Mr. Justice Steinle of the court, at a testimonial dinner honoring Edward on the occasion of his retirement, described his opinions. Many indeed rank as literary gems. They reflect his keen power of analysis and discrimination, and above all, his tremendous knowledge and appreciation of sound legal principles. Reading his opinions, and I think I read them all, is indeed a humbling experience for a legal academic, as he clearly did not suffer from his lack of a university, much less a professional education. Edward stood for retention in 1936 and again in 1946, and these are quite interesting elections. He confronted an opponent, one Turner, who undoubtedly responding to the 5 old men of the U.S. Supreme Court and their votes invalidating much of the early New Deal legislation, pledged he would never vote to hold a law unconstitutional. Young Tom, a law student, debated the issue with the daughter of his father's opponent before the University of Wisconsin Progressive Club. Alarmed at the potential for a Depression-era backlash against traditional Supreme Court jurisdiction, a bipartisan attorneys committee was organized in support of Edward, and he won by a significant majority. In his second retention election, Edward's opponent, Henry P. Hughes, a circuit judge in Oshkosh, made Edward's age the issue. In a letter requesting attorneys to circulate his petitions, Hughes stated, in 1935, the average age of the court was 56 years of age. Today, the average age is 68 years. 3 of the present members are over 73 years of age. I am 41 years old. I think that was his primary qualification. In a radio speech supporting his retention, Edward stated, I am 73 years of age, old enough to have 6 grandchildren and to have had 30 years of Supreme Court experience, but nevertheless young compared to such a man as Justice Holmes, who continued an active and illustrious judicial career until the age of 93. Tom, at the time in private practice in Portage, sought the counsel of former Governor Philip Fox LaFollette and was advised to work the progressive side of the street and contact as many party supporters as possible. He believed that his efforts in this regard might well have been determinative in what was an extremely close election. Madison attorney Joseph A. Ranney has discussed the pivotal role that Edward played on the Wisconsin Supreme Court in several excellent articles. His career began at a difficult time, in the depths of the Depression, when the Wisconsin legislature enacted reform laws that situated state government in areas that it had never occupied in the past. This presented enormous challenges for the court. Unlike the early New Deal U.S. Supreme Court, the Wisconsin justices, under the leadership of Chief Justice Marvin Rosenberry, were by and large moderate and supportive of these legislative initiatives. Edward's stalwart beliefs can be discerned in his dissenting opinion in the 1931 case of Korstvedt versus Bank of Deerfield, in which, in Ranney's words, Edward began his emergence as the leader of the court's conservative wing. Korstvedt concerned the constitutionality of a Wisconsin law that allowed banks to defer depositors' demands for immediate withdrawal of their funds and to make gradual repayments over time. Sounds like it's a wonderful life. Edward expressed a conservative perspective, concluding that impairment of individual depositors' rights to immediate access to their funds overcame the interests of society at large to the solvency of its banks. Unlike some of the current politically conservative judges, however, Edward was pragmatic, collegial, and deeply respectful of the doctrine of stare decisis. As stated by Ranney, Edward Fairchild lived in an era of dramatic social and economic change and played a significant part in shaping that change. Edward retired from the Wisconsin Supreme Court on January 7, 1957, at 86 years of age. Immediately prior to his retirement, he swore in his son, Tom Fairchild, as a justice on the court. He died on October 29, 1965, at the age of 93. The ultimate distillation of Edward's career was authored by Mr. Justice McCann in his memorial on behalf of the court. Mr. Justice Fairchild's career can be summed up as that of a typical farm boy with only a high school education, working his way up, passing the bar examination, entering politics, and crowning his career with 40 years on the bench, the last portion of which he served as Chief Justice of this court. Per aspera ad asta, which I'm told means through hardship to the stars. We'll next turn our attention to the life and times of Thomas E. Fairchild. Tom was born on Christmas Day, 1912 in Milwaukee. The first writing that we have from young Tom is addressed to his father, Edward. He attended the Grand Avenue Grade School. The family then moved to the east side of Milwaukee, where Tom enrolled in Riverside High School, from which he graduated in 1928 at age 16. He played the French horn in the orchestra and performed on a national radio broadcast in 1928, reported proudly in the Dansville papers. Tom's parents were 40 years older than him. However, there was always a close, if somewhat formal, relationship between them. Tom recalled fondly the many Sunday walks he took with his father around their neighborhood, streetcar rides during which Edward would discuss the various neighborhoods they passed through, trips to Milwaukee County Zoo, and automobile adventures he would take, sometimes all the way to Rockford and back, with Edward and a close friend, a judge on the Milwaukee County Criminal Court who owned a car. He also took several train trips to Madison with his father while he served in the state Senate, as well as a memorable journey to Washington, D.C., where he had the opportunity to meet President Harding. Upon graduation from high school, Tom took an unusual direction in his higher education, enrolling as a student in Deep Springs College, which was situated in the high desert terrain, Inyo County, California, near the Nevada border and close to Death Valley. That arrow, could you turn the lights down just a little? That arrow can show you it's still a little bright, I think. That arrow can show you the little bit of green is the college that he attended. The college was all male and had a total student body of 20 students. Deep Springs charged no tuition or fees. It employed a radical governance system in which the student body, considered beneficial owners of the institution, elected one of the college trustees, was instrumental in the hiring of faculty and determination of the curriculum, and performed all the tasks associated with the operation of the college, including milking the cows, collecting eggs and slaughtering the chickens, repairing agricultural implements, cooking, dishwashing, painting, and serving as office personnel, carpenters, and laundrymen. L.L. Nunn, who made his fortune in Telluride, Colorado, developing a system for the long-distance transmission of alternating current, founded Deep Springs. Nunn had a lifelong, if eclectic, interest in education. In 1911, Nunn sold his commercial interests and used the proceeds to fund the Telluride Association. Through the association, he constructed a large house at Cornell University, which became known as the Telluride House, offering room and board scholarships to former workers of his power business in Colorado and Utah. In 1917, Nunn took an auto trip to Death Valley. He was immediately struck by the isolation, solitude, and stark beauty of the site. He purchased a ranch in Deep Springs Valley. It was here that he constructed his university. Nunn expressed his vision to students shortly before his death in 1925. Gentlemen, for what came ye to the desert? Not for conventional scholastic training, not for ranch life, not to become proficient in commercial or professional pursuits for personal gain. You came to prepare for a life of service, with the understanding that superior ability and generous purpose would be expected of you. In considering Tom Fairchild's public life, the effects of this vision, with its strong emphasis of a life informed by the ethic of public engagement, are clear. His years in the desert were indeed formative, and in Nunn's words, he heard the voice of the desert. In 1931, Tom left Deep Springs after 2 productive years to matriculate at Princeton University, which was probably quite a change. Prior to his acceptance at Deep Springs, he had gained admission at Princeton, which would only hold that status open for 2 years. Not surprisingly, the Ivy League tradition-bound Princeton gave no credit for his 2-year studies at the radical setting of Deep Springs. So he began anew as an 18-year-old freshman. At the end of his sophomore year, the academic gypsy made yet one more move, transferring this time to Cornell University. This move was made once again to benefit from Mr. Nunn's largesse. The Telluride Association at Cornell provided selected students, including those transferring from Deep Springs, the privilege of living in its beautiful residence expense-free. As a result, Cornell was familiar with Deep Springs and gave full reciprocity to credits earned there. During the Depression, finances were tight in the Fairchild household, and these advantages proved irresistible. Tom lived in Telluride House and graduated 1 year early in 1934. After graduation, Tom enrolled in the University of Wisconsin Law School. Because of Edward's position as a justice on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, the Fairchilds believed the law school might well present unique opportunities to young Tom. He could also save significant funds living at home and paying the then in-state tuition of $37.50 a semester. Tom's favorite faculty at the law school included the Kingsfield-like William Herbert Page, Nate Feinsinger, Dick Campbell, Oliver Rundell, and his father's old friend Frank Bosel. During his 3rd year of law school, Tom served as law secretary to his father, a part-time position that paid the then princely sum of $150 a month and carried a commitment to extend the position full-time through the 1st year after graduation. While at law school, Tom often studied in the Phi Delta Phi library located on the top floor of the old YMCA building. Walking through the building, he observed a striking young woman working there who caught his fancy. After a traditional and extremely appropriate courtship, Tom's words, he proposed to Eleanor Dahl. In 1937, after both graduated from the UW, the young couple were married in Lowell, Indiana, where Eleanor had been raised on a nearby farm. I think it looked more like that. Notwithstanding his 1-year postgraduate commitment to his father, both Tom and Edward were concerned about employee opportunities during the prolonged economic downturn. As a result, Edward encouraged Tom to begin his employment search immediately. Dan Grady was a prominent attorney who had served as president of the UW Board of Regents. A colleague on the court who knew Grady put in a good word. When Tom received an offer from the Portage law firm of Grady, Farnsworth, and Walker in 1938, Edward agreed to release him from the remainder of his obligation, and Tom became a junior associate and relocated his family to Portage. Tom left the firm in 1941 to accept a position in the United States Office of Price Administration in Chicago. He later characterized his experience as the greatest educational experience which an individual could have. The office reached directly and intimately into almost all phases of human life. Tom initially was the expert in the rationing of rubber truck tires. The arrangement was not ideal. Tom's growing family remained in Portage. He worked in Chicago through Saturday mornings, then took the Hiawatha train to Portage to be with his family, returning on Sunday evening. Fortunately, on March 30th, 1942, the Milwaukee regional office of the OPA, to which Tom was posted, was opened. Its geographic jurisdiction consisted of 22 counties and included Milwaukee, Racine, Kenosha, Sheboygan, Fond du Lac, Madison, Janesville, Beloit, and all areas in between. His traveling for the OPA was an excellent primer for his future political campaigning. Tom served as district enforcement attorney for the Milwaukee region. This was an excellent legal experience. It included referrals to the U.S. Attorney for criminal prosecutions, injunctions in both federal or state court with associated contempt proceedings, civil suits for treble damages, and license suspension actions. The Milwaukee office under Tom's leadership obtained treble damages awards of more than $1.2 million, commenced more than 2,300 actions, and conducted more than 18,000 investigations. At the end of the war, it was apparent the OPA would not long survive, and Tom once again began to seek other employment. After considering a small firm in Winona, Minnesota, he accepted an offer from the largest law firm in Milwaukee, Miller, Mack & Fairchild, now Foley & Lardner. While at Miller Mack, Tom had a corporate practice ranging from reviewing pension and profit-sharing plans to ensure IRS compliance, to working on stock splits and securities review, to wage and hour defense. Tom enjoyed the work and the generous salary. His time at Miller Mack was brief. Like his father before him, he was drawn to politics. Naturally enough, Tom's early political beliefs were reflected by his father's stalwart Republican outlook. Thus, a 12-year-old Tom set up tables on the front lawn in Milwaukee in 1924 and distributed literature in support of Coolidge and Daw, something he never lived down. In 1928, Tom attended an Al Smith rally in Madison. Though a letter he sent his father makes clear his interest, as befitting someone who had just graduated from high school, was more in the debate over Prohibition and the novel New York City campaign ambience than in the Democratic candidate himself. Tom was a member of the Young Republican Club at Princeton and ventured out during the 1932 presidential election, to play in a makeshift band and deliver speeches in support of President Hoover, a man his father deeply admired. Tom's politics evolved during his time at Cornell, where he was president of the Liberal Club. He was initially drawn to the Progressive Party of Robert La Follette, which had split from the Republican Party in 1934. He was active in the Wisconsin Progressive Club and law school, and remained involved during his time in Portage, where he served as county chair of the Progressive Party of Columbia County, and for 1 year as state chair of the Young Progressives in Wisconsin. Everything changed for Tom in July of 1948 when he got a phone call from an acquaintance, Jim Doyle, who indicated that the Democratic Convention was coming up and that a number of young activists, who came to be known as the Democratic Organizing Committee, were looking to fill a slate for the election. He asked Tom if he would consider running for Attorney General of Wisconsin in the 1948 elections. Tom's reply was characteristic. "Why, Jim, I don't even know if I'm a Democrat." The Progressive Party had folded in the spring of 1946 when young Bob La Follette, then a U.S. Senator, rejoined the Republicans. Much of the senior leadership of the party followed him into the Republican fold. Young Bob had to run in a Republican primary to retain his Senate seat and faced active opposition from the stalwart leadership of the party who despised the La Follettes. They were assisted in their efforts by Wisconsin's third party, the Democrats, that outside of the Milwaukee area had atrophied into a largely patronage-based vestigial and conservative party with no elected statewide and virtually no legislative representatives. Young Bob ran a rather listless campaign and was narrowly defeated by Joe McCarthy, who ran on the slogan that Congress needs a tail gunner, though as it turned out, it did not necessarily get one in McCarthy. With the demise of the Progressive Party, Democratic leadership from Milwaukee, including Bob Tian and colorful ex-socialist Mayor Daniel Hone, along with Madison liberals, including UW law professor William Gorham Rice and Julia Bogholt, wife of a UW philosophy professor, welcomed young liberal progressives into the party, including Tom's friends Jim and Ruth Doyle, Carl Thompson, Horace Wilkie, Pat Lucy, Henry Royce, and Miles McMillan. In 1948, Gaylord Nelson joined after an unsuccessful flirtation with the Republicans. These self-styled Young Turks were closely allied with the Americans for Democratic Action, an unabashedly liberal organization led by Eleanor Roosevelt and Jim Doyle. By 1948, the Young Turks had taken over the Wisconsin Democratic Party. Intrigued, Tom drove to Jefferson Junction only several weeks before the filing deadline. The proposed ticket included Carl Thompson for governor. He's the last one there. Horace Wilkie for Congress. Ruth Doyle for Assembly, and Gaylord Nelson for the state Senate. After a steak dinner and loosened up by several martinis, Tom agreed with 2 conditions. He had plans to take his family vacation in Dansville, so the petitions would have to be obtained by others, and he had to be a part-time candidate as he needed his law firm's salary to support his family. Tom provided a wonderful description of the early Democratic campaign style. We Democrats had no significant money, and those campaigns were really on a shoestring. I drove to towns in all parts of the state, played polkas over a loudspeaker on the top of my car to attract attention. If you can imagine that. Made street speeches, hoping newspapers would report each day's press release. Got acquainted with as many people as I could in stores and on the streets. Stood at factory gates in early hours, shaking hands with people coming to work, and introduced myself at weekend picnics of ethnic and other organizations. On election day, the Young Turks had done remarkably well. Gaylord Nelson defeated Fred Risser, a progressive state senator from Madison, who had followed young Bob into the Republican Party. Ruth Doyle won in the Assembly, with Pat Lucy and a youthful Bill Proxmire. You can see Prox there, second from the end. He was indeed quite youthful. 2 of the state's 10 congressional districts in Milwaukee also went to Democrats. Former socialist Andrew B. Miller and Clement Zablocki. They're pictured with Judge Fairchild. The only statewide success for the Democrats was Tom's victory for Attorney General, with the highest vote total in history for a Democrat, and the first statewide since Ryan Duffy's 1 term in the U.S. Senate, won in the 1932 FDR landslide. Edward proudly administered the oath of office. Not to diminish Tom's achievement, but he was certainly in the right place at the right time, as his Republican opponent was actually repudiated by many of his supporters after he was charged with public intoxication and urination on a bank window in downtown Madison during broad daylight. Perhaps a Depression-era reflection on the banking industry. Reminded me of the scene in Bonnie and Clyde where they informed the recently evicted farmer that they robbed banks. Parenthetically, his opponent was not punished on the grounds that his conduct came within the reach of the constitutional right to free speech and expression. Only in Madison. During Tom's 1 term as Attorney General, he displayed traits that were to be seen in his subsequent judicial career. Principled decision-making without regard to political consequences, and a strong support for civil rights. Tom investigated racial discrimination and access to municipal pools in Beloit. The city maintained 2. One was a 13,000 square foot modern pool traditionally used exclusively by white citizens. The other, a 2,250 square foot older facility used by African Americans. In 1950, 4 African American youths who showed up at the larger pool, as the paper said, were persuaded by a pool administrator to use the pool traditionally reserved for blacks. As a result, Tom brought a controversial action against city manager A.D. Telfer, seeking an injunction against future racial discrimination. As reported by Aldrich Revell in the Capital Times, name from my youth, in a deposition taken by Tom Fairchild himself, the city manager testified that he had never heard of any whites swimming in the smaller pool, that he approved of the action of a pool attendant persuading the 4 young children not to swim in the larger pool, that he was familiar with state law prohibiting denial of equal enjoyment of public accommodation on account of race, that he had never personally issued a written or verbal order to discriminate, that he intended to comply with the law in the future, and that if an African American were to present himself at the larger pool, it would be the duty of the attendant to admit him. Because of problems of sustaining jurisdiction, since the racial discrimination was an informally enforced custom and not de jure, and Tom admitted that he was unfamiliar with Section 1983 at the time, and the sworn promise of future access to the new pool without regard to race, and at the express request of Governor Rennebaum, Tom dismissed the suit without prejudice. Tom's tendency to, in effect, assert, "Damn the political torpedoes, full speed ahead," could be seen in his willingness to provide opinions as to the legality of politically sensitive practices. Examples included an opinion concerning the legality of anti-vivisectionists blocking enforcement of a 1949 law requiring humane societies to honor medical school requisitions for stray dogs from the pound. That's one you can't win on. An opinion validating the setting of standards for public welfare programs funded jointly by state and federal governments and administered by the counties, many of which were paying lower benefits than state and federal law required. An opinion that the city of Milwaukee and its socialist mayor, Frank Zeidler, could issue rent control rules to protect the health and safety of the public. And an opinion that public school release time for religious instruction for Roman Catholic school children was a violation of the state constitution. We all know, I think, that the most deeply unpopular opinion he issued was one declaring 4 popular radio shows and 1 television program that gave away cash prizes to the audience, including Stop the Music, launched in 1948 and emceed by Bert Parks, to be illegal lotteries. The level of hostility can be seen in a letter to the Milwaukee Sentinel from Miss Pat McKinley. What is the world coming to? A few people telling the people of our state what they can listen to and what they can watch. This seems more like things we were told happened behind the Iron Curtain. Fairchild's action in this matter is going to make a lot of people vote for someone who can apply themselves to the job and not waste people's money. This is one of literally hundreds of such letters. As the state's only statewide Democratic office holder, Tom was pressured to move up the ticket in 1950 and run either for governor, vacated by the retirement of Republican Oscar Rennebaum, or to challenge the state's popular, aptly named senior citizen, Alexander Wiley. Despite good reasons to keep the Attorney General's position, including the political advantages of an incumbent, not to mention a steady salary to support his family, and this is a recurring theme for Tom Fairchild, he gave in to the pressure and announced for the Senate post. First, he had to traverse a difficult primary against Dan Hone, former Milwaukee mayor, a Milwaukee man named Sanderson who enjoyed some labor support, and my favorite, Lavi Dilwig, a popular multi-sport athlete at Marquette University who played for the Packers while practicing law in Green Bay. Tom won the primary and faced the well-funded Wiley. It was one of the first campaigns that relied to an extent on radio and television to get out the word. I'm going to see if I can do this. You turned up. That was hard to find. He ran on a remarkably liberal platform, and this will really surprise you, perhaps. In an October 1950 discussion panel, Tom stated prescient views on health insurance. Do I believe that the high cost of medical care causes middle and low-income families to delay needed medical care? I do. Do I believe that the high cost makes it impossible for the great mass of people to obtain preventative care? I do. Do I believe that our Social Security system should be expanded so as to provide a means with which to pay the cost of medical care? I do. I've told you where I stand on the principle involved in government health insurance. I view it as the projection of the Social Security insurance system so as to provide funds to meet the costs of medical care. Remember, this is at a time when Joe McCarthy was in the Senate. He also took a strong position on income redistribution. America must continue to improve its economic lot by leveling up rather than leveling down. We must make certain that this leveling up process is continued in the future and not the idea of letting the bottom income groups exist on the crumbs that fall from the table of a wealthy minority. Finally, responding to practices that he found deeply undemocratic and personally offensive. He was one of the very first to attack Wisconsin's junior senator, Joe McCarthy. On February 9, 1950, McCarthy famously told an audience in West Virginia that the State Department was thoroughly infested by communists and stated for the first time that he had a list naming many individuals who would appear to be either card-carrying members or certainly loyal to the Communist Party. Tom charged that a similar speech by McCarthy at the state Republican convention was an admission that the GOP can only win if it instills in the minds of Americans hysteria and fear, and further accused McCarthy of smearing the State Department with wild charges and cruel innuendo. McCarthy replied to a Fairchild telegram demanding he release the names on his infamous list as follows. I have been too busy on more important things to have had the time to read telegrams and letters, much less to answer crackpots, Tom, who want to protect the communists and perverts in the State Department. Despite his aggressive campaign, Tom was defeated by a 55 to 45% vote, and once again found himself unemployed until President Truman appointed him United States Attorney for the Western District of Wisconsin in Madison. The Democrats' focus in 1952 was on defeating Joe McCarthy. Gained a little weight in the 2 years. Been there. He had attracted negative attention from liberals in both parties, such as Tom Fairchild, as early as 1950, and respected newspapers such as the Capital Times and the Milwaukee Journal. McCarthy took to the offense, accusing the editor of the Capital Times of being a communist, and the paper itself as serving as the red mouthpiece for the Communist Party in Wisconsin. In 1952, Democrats considering a run against McCarthy included State Senator Gaylord Nelson, Jim Doyle, Henry Royce, an unsuccessful candidate for Milwaukee mayor and attorney general, and an uncertain Tom Fairchild. The party had no endorsement mechanism, so the candidates sought to avoid an expensive and destructive primary. Jim Doyle bowed out first in favor of Nelson after a remarkable arbitration proceeding in which Miles McMillan, editor of the Capital Times, represented Nelson, and Morris Rubin, editor of the Progressive Magazine, represented Doyle. Robert Lewis, who worked for the National Farmers Union, served as the judge whose charge was to determine who would be the strongest candidate to run against McCarthy, and he selected Gaylord Nelson. Royce remained intent on running. In November of 1951, the Democratic Organizing Committee considered who would be the best candidate, with Nelson again the strongest, Tom Fairchild second, followed by Royce and Doyle. Despite this sentiment, Nelson dropped out, leaving Royce the favorite to gain the nomination. An informal effort was organized in Milwaukee to draft the uncertain Tom Fairchild. Obstacles existed, however, to his running. Tom was the U.S. attorney and could not participate in a campaign for the nomination. And more fundamentally, there was the recurring problem with the need of a regular salary to support his family. This is my favorite picture right now. Madison and Milwaukee liberals continued to press for a Fairchild candidacy. After a period of indecision, Tom agreed to run in a primary with Royce. Tom prevailed in an extremely tight election by some 3,000 votes of the 190,000 cast. Tom waged a characteristically diligent and exhaustive campaign. Thus, on Fairchild Day in Milwaukee, his schedule included 9 o'clock, Republicans for Fairchild breakfast, 10 o'clock, Royce backyard rally, 11 o'clock, welcome by Mayor Zeidler, 12 o'clock, testimonial luncheon, 2 o'clock, corner speech, where he would go out to a busy street corner and make a speech. 2:45, another corner speech. 4:15, a speech at Southgate. This is probably his favorite part. 5 o'clock sandwiches at Kobach's Pub. 7:30 parade. 8 o'clock Veterans for Fairchild party. 8:30 Fairchild radio address. He conducted a 17,000-mile campaign entirely by automobile and garnered public support from national Democrats intent on defeating McCarthy, and including presidential candidate Adlai Stevenson and Senator Estes Kefauver of Tennessee. Eleanor played a significant role. In a wonderful letter to Miss Pearl Kluge of Racine, she stated, "I shall plan to meet you at the Business and Professional Women's Club meeting. Perhaps these bits of information about me will help with your introduction. Wife of Thomas E. Fairchild, former Attorney General of the state, and former United States Attorney for the Western District of Wisconsin, now the Democratic candidate for United States Senate. Mother of 4 children from 3.5 to 13 years of age. Active in the leadership, active in the League of Women Voters, and in the PTA and school activities, presently very much engaged in my husband's campaign." Tom's campaign was the premier race statewide for the Democrats. As reported in the Wisconsin State Journal, while Thomas E. Fairchild has had considerable assistance in his campaign against McCarthy, gubernatorial candidate William Proxmire has continued to go it virtually single-handed. He has had to write his own ads and radio talks, put out his literature, and get his releases to the newspapers. He and his wife have done most of the work on the mail, and Proxmire has been his own driver on his endless travels through the state. This situation, along with fundamental differences in personality and political approach, led to a sometimes thorny relationship between the two. Tom delivered a remarkable address in Burlington that reflected his deep-seated rejection of McCarthy's tactics. "We believe in America that truth is developed from free discussion of ideas. Ideas cannot be killed by force. If an idea be wrong, it must be outthought and proved false by logic and experience. You can't kill it by punishing the man who holds it. When we destroy a man's character, we take away from his dignity of soul. We take from him something that money can't buy, something which may never be regained. When we stop and examine this spectacle, it revolts us. And yet the floor of the United States Senate has turned into an arena of crosses upon which the characters of men and women are crucified." Tom's attack on McCarthy was supported by a self-styled truth squad, which followed the senator throughout the state, challenging his assertions and emphasizing his poor record. Truth squatters included at one time or another Gaylord Nelson, Bill Proxmire, Miles McMillan, Carl Thompson, and Horace Wilkie. A confrontation in La Crosse was typical. The senator was speaking at a service club luncheon, and through an open window, attendees could hear Nelson and Proxmire aggressively heckling McCarthy. During the question period, McMillan, who was in the audience, rose to query the senator. "Get him out," McCarthy shouted. "That's a representative of a communist newspaper." Attendees unceremoniously escorted McMillan out of the hall, and his questions remained unasked. Tom courageously critiqued not only McCarthy's charges of communist sympathies, but also the system put in place by the Truman administration in 1947 to assess government employee loyalty. Calling for revocation of the program, Tom concluded, "Loss of arbitrary authority is a risk inherent in democracy. The present loyalty program is an abridgment of individual liberty, and every such encroachment tends towards totalitarianism. To preserve freedom, we must have the courage to take the risks that are the price of freedom." In spite of Tom's spirited campaign, the extra resources supporting his efforts, and active support from the Truth Squad, McCarthy was reelected by a 54 to 46% vote. The beneficiary of Republican crossover votes, Tom read comfortably ahead of both Stevenson and Proxmire. Within days of the election, Tom received many telegrams of gratitude for his good fight. The words of Hubert Humphrey, who had long served as Wisconsin's informal Democratic senator, are indicative of the respect Tom had earned. "I am sick at heart at the results in Wisconsin. You ran a beautiful campaign under great handicaps. You deserve to win. We are in a difficult period in American politics, however, and the odds simply were against us. We have a great responsibility here in the Midwest, Tom, to keep the liberal message before the people. Once again, without a job, Tom joined Floyd Copps and Irv Charney to form Fairchild, Charney, and Copps in Milwaukee, where, among others, he successfully represented a man subpoenaed to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. In 1956, Tom decided to run for a seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. The idea originated with Edward, who was retiring. Tom filed his papers in December. There was a 3-candidate primary, which Tom won handily, followed by his 2-1 victory in the general election. While Tom participated in many cases during his tenure on the court, I will briefly discuss 2 that reflect his record of continuous commitment to equal opportunity and willingness to meet a politically unpopular opinion. The first case is Ross versus Ebert, a 1957 action brought by 2 African Americans denied membership by the Bricklayers Union, indisputably on the basis of their race. The 2 sought injunctive relief requiring the union to accept them as members. The majority held that, like other associations, trade unions could establish qualifications for membership, and the courts were powerless to compel the admission of an individual into such an association. The court found no remedy provided by the Fair Employment Code and rejected any equal protection claim because of the absence of state action. Tom filed a vigorous dissent. He believed that unions were distinguishable from other voluntary associations and should be subject to judicial restraint if they discriminated based on race. He memorably observed, "We are engaged in a struggle to make equality and freedom realities for all Americans. To be denied the economic opportunity to work out one's destiny as best he can, solely because of a racial or religious difference, impairs the very substance of citizenship itself. Perhaps the degree of the impairment is so great, and the character of the rights impaired so fundamental, that the wrong must be recognized and remedied by the judicial branch, even in the absence of action by the legislature," and certainly the Fairchild courts will recognize that style. He also would have found an equal protection violation resolving the state action question by finding that state court refusal to invalidate a private agreement to discriminate based on race would violate the 14th Amendment. The dissenting opinion earned Tom the praise of President Truman. It also had legs, as the legislature subsequently passed a law providing effective remedies for racial discrimination by unions. The other decision I will address was mischievous and caused trouble, not so much for Tom, but for his friends and colleagues. The case is Macaulay versus Tropic of Cancer, a 1983 obscenity dispute in which Tom authored the majority opinion, concluding the work was not obscene. The battle of experts in this case included professors from UW-Wisconsin, in Madison and Milwaukee on behalf of the book, and clergymen from 3 faiths in support of the prosecution. Tom concluded, again in a very Fairchild-like understatement, "Our reading of the book has engendered no enthusiasm. We do not endorse it. Our judgment will preserve its access to the marketplace where Wisconsin readers may buy it if they choose. In terms of the good that this particular book is likely to accomplish, we probably do no great thing in preserving it. Our function, however, is not to determine the quality of the book. Our duty is to respect and enforce in full measure the freedom of expression guaranteed by state and federal constitution." Chief Justice Brown's dissenting opinion was blunt. "The book is a collection of anecdotes which, with few exceptions, describe in detail the sexual proclivities of a number of depraved men. The author's account of their practices and perversions in the erotic arena are described in the vilest terms known to the English language. The portrayal is patently offensive." The blowback was immediate. One John Jen is representative. He wrote to Tom, "A mother's lot is hard enough without having this filth around so that youngsters can get a hold of it. And more ominously, I want to vote in the April election, but will not vote for any justice of the Supreme Court who will not try and get rid of the filth." Legislators, represented by several letters from Republican Assemblyman Ray Heinzen of Marshfield, were also critical. Having read enough of this book to make one retch with disgust, I must come to this conclusion. The court has sadly misjudged the contemporary community standards of decency of a great many Wisconsin communities, including my own. But perhaps the most serious consequences of this opinion were confronted first by Tom's good friend, Justice Horace Wilkie, and subsequently by another friend, Justice Nathan Heffernan. Thus, when Wilkie stood for retention in 1964, he confronted an aggressive and well-funded campaign from Howard Hoyle Jr. of Beaver Dam, who ran with the active support of conservative groups throughout the state. Hoyle asserted that the High Court's philosophy had contributed to the distribution of obscene literature, the breakdown of family units, and other symptoms of moral decline. He lashed out at Wilkie for his vote in support of the majority opinion. Wilkie, who had 5 daughters, was vilified, and one of his daughters, a friend of mine in college, reported receiving anonymous telephone calls at home that cruelly made alarming and defamatory attacks on the family values and character of the justice. While Wilkie survived these attacks and was reelected, the election ultimately helped transform the nature of Wisconsin Supreme Court elections from a matter of professional competence and retention to a well-funded and aggressive attack based on votes taken in controversial cases or on the presumed political ideology and social beliefs of a particular justice. Ironically, Heffernan, who was not even on the court when the decision was rendered, was forced to overcome similar difficulties. Hoyle, running for a second time, seized upon a phrase in a Heffernan opinion, referring to the Age of Enlightenment, declaring that this referred favorably to an era characterized by widespread breakdown of the family unit, free-flowing filth, soaring incidents of teenage indiscretion, disregard of personal responsibility, and monstrous growth in the power of government over people. After the fuss, and Heffernan was reelected, after the fuss, it was perhaps surprising when Tom Fairchild, the author of the opinion, ran unopposed in 1966, seeking a second term. Right? Mr. Hoyle had run out of gas. After his retention, his future was bright. Tom would become Chief Justice in just 2 years and could have held that post for at least 8 years, with another 6 years after that if reelected to a third term on the court. However, shortly after his election, Tom was confronted with a difficult choice. Judge Ryan Duffy of the United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit finally announced that he was assuming senior status. An appointment to the vacancy was Tom's for the acting, with his 2 long-term associates, Gaylord Nelson and William Proxmire, state senators, and LBJ as president. This was a difficult decision for Tom. He enjoyed the work of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, appreciated the collegial and respectful relationship of the justices, and his position on the state's historic court of last resort. He also very much looked forward to assuming the role of Chief Justice that his father had held immediately prior to his retirement. Characteristically, he sought advice, this time from state Supreme Court luminaries, including Walter Schaefer of Illinois and Roger Traynor of California, as well as those in Wisconsin whose advice he valued, including Professor Willard Hurst of the UW Law School, Leon Feingold, and old friend Jim Doyle, by then a distinguished United States District Judge. A former colleague, William Wingert, who had been defeated seeking an additional term on the court, unquestionably gave Tom pause. Wingert emphasized a lifetime tenure of federal judges, the continuing salary for life, and the difficulty he had experienced starting a new legal career relatively late in life. Tom also could have gone to school on the recent retention elections of his friends Horace Wilkie and Nate Heffernan, and anticipated the changing nature of the Supreme Court election process, as well as the corresponding corrosive effects of the personal and working collegial relationships among the justices that would inevitably follow. In any event, Tom elected to accept the federal appointment. In 1966, Chief Judge John Simpson Hastings met with Tom and shared his perspective that it was best if all active judges on the Seventh Circuit relocate their residence to Chicago. Tom respectfully but firmly declined to move from Milwaukee, where he planned to maintain his chambers in the historic federal courthouse. Tom did ultimately relocate to Chicago in the late summer of 1974 in anticipation of his appointment as Chief Judge the next year. This was the year of my clerkship, and I had the unique experience of working in the Milwaukee courthouse during the summer months of 1974, and then moving to Chicago with my wife in late August, where I spent the remainder of my clerkship in the Mies van der Rohe design complex with its Alexander Calder Stabile entitled Flamingo, which was dedicated in 1974 by a circus parade in which Mayor Daley and Calder led a procession of elephants, calliopes, and a team of 40 horses up State Street in celebration of the work and providing me with amazing lunchtime entertainment. It's quite a change from Mayor Daley's persona, prior persona. This resulted in a wonderful opportunity for me. In September and October, while we had relocated to an apartment located on the near north side of Chicago, my wife was in Europe on a graduate fellowship. At the same time, while Eleanor was unhappily closing down their home in Milwaukee, Tom had temporarily moved to what can only be characterized charitably as a somewhat rundown, even seedy SRO, a bit further north on Clark. It just absolutely bewildered us as to why he picked that particular place. We were sure that his fellow tenants had no idea who their neighbor was. Largely for lack of much to go home to in the end of the day, we often worked in chambers until 7 or 7:30, adjourned to Berghoff's restaurant, closed down the politically incorrectly named Gentleman's Bar, consumed a dinner of German sausage and dark beer, and walked slowly north to our respective lodgings. This was an opportunity for me to get to know the judge well from the very start of my clerkship, and I gained a keen appreciation for his fond memories of his political career and abiding love for the state of Wisconsin. Indeed, we often joked that when driving home to Wisconsin on the weekends, we both felt that we should stop in South Beloit to change our Illinois license plates to the preferred Wisconsin one so no passing motorist could get the wrong impression. Tom authored many important opinions during his time on the Seventh Circuit. Certainly the best known was his majority opinion in United States versus David Dellinger et al., or the Chicago 7 appeal. The record in that case was more than 22,000 pages, and as was his custom, Tom and his clerks read the entire record before preparing the final opinion. Tom's opinion is notable not only for its length and extraordinarily fact-rich texture, but for the deft touch of its author. In a trial laden with misbehavior, name-calling, and taunting by everyone involved, and featuring the dramatic divide between the ethos and sense of propriety of the elderly trial judge in collision with the 60s in-your-face, admittedly provocative behavior of the defendants, the opinion is measured and careful in its discussion of judicial and prosecutorial overreaching. In the end, it is marked by the noble kindness of its spirit as much as for its heralded analysis of appropriate voir dire in high-profile political trials and the bounds of judicial discretion and appropriate behavior of all parties involved. His lifelong commitment to civil rights is also evident in such opinions as Waters versus Fernco Construction Corporation, an employment discrimination case in which, although later reversed by the US Supreme Court, he stated, "The historic inequality of treatment of black workers seems to us to establish that it is prima facie racial discrimination to refuse to consider qualifications of a black job seeker before hiring from an approved list containing only the names of white bricklayers. How else will qualified black applicants be able to overcome the racial imbalance in a particular craft itself the result of past discrimination?" There is discernible a clear, bright line over 30 years from the four lads seeking to swim in the Beloit Municipal Pool reserved by unbroken custom for whites in the late 1940s that he challenged while Attorney General, to the Milwaukee Bricklayers Union that consciously discriminated based on race that he condemned in his 1957 dissent on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, to the next generation of black bricklayers denied employment in Cook County in 1977 because they had not been included in a list of qualified union workers in a trade that had historically discriminated against them based on race. Tom served as a judge on the Seventh Circuit from his appointment in 1966 until 1975 when he became Chief Judge of the Circuit for 6 years, until 1981 when he assumed the position of Senior Judge, until his death on February 12, 2007 at the age of 94. He gave a fitting summary of his experience as a jurist. I have indeed enjoyed the work of an appellate judge, almost 10 years on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, where every case got the attention of 7 justices, and more than 30 on the 7th Circuit, where most cases are considered by only 3. I have not found decision of cases easy. Where there are critical choices to be made in the course of decision, my own insistence on seeing both sides has often made me agonize over them. Nevertheless, there is satisfaction in careful analysis and working out a sound result. I end with the words of his former law partner, Irv Charney, who memorialized Tom for all of us who had the privilege of working with him. How does one do justice to honoring a person of such extraordinary achievement and such magnificent human qualities as Tom Fairchild? Those of us who had the opportunity to share part of our lives with him have been enriched by that experience. He was a role model for many of us in demonstrating that good can triumph over evil and that integrity can triumph over opportunism. And I apologize here for the sentimentality.
Preserve your memories, they're all that's left you.
Extraordinarily fact-rich. What an amazing presentation. Thank you. I'm speechless, truly. But I am not fully speechless because we have a gift
I
for
know.
you.
I appreciate it.
Let me say that after the presentation, we invite you to join us in the lobby for a reception, and there you can see the original gargoyle that fell off the law school building when it was demolished, and which I think is viewed by many of us, because it survived without any attention whatsoever, as a symbol of good luck and the law school's perseverance. Sadly, what we've done to represent that is made replicas, and I gotta tell you, they don't capture the original, but they are nonetheless a symbol of the law school's immense gratitude and appreciation for a truly remarkable lecture. Nils, enjoy your gargoyle. Let's thank Professor Olson once more for a wonderful lecture, and then please join us for the reception.
Well, actually, there are any questions. I think if there are any questions that I can answer, I will. I mean, obviously, I don't know everything about the judge's political career. Though it was enormous fun, I must admit, reconnecting by immersing myself in the archives of the Historical Society. Most of the pictures actually came from, believe it or not, eBay. I was incredibly surprised. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
I'll explain those.
Sure.
Having looked at Tom Fairchild and his dad's career, and obviously you alluded to some of the things they shared. Tom Fairchild has incredible reverence for his father. What of those qualities
think his father was a very cautious judge. He was very much a stalwart, although it was very interesting to read his opinions and to think about the difference between what it meant to be a conservative justice then and what it means now in terms of the approach. He would have a get-together where all of the judges would come to his chambers every Friday, drink tea. I'm sure Tom would have had something else. As you said, I mean, I think Tom was very much revered his father and his father's tradition. He was a very careful judge. He thought very carefully about his positions before he took them. I can think of many cases where he stepped back in order to try to avoid further negative precedent from the Supreme Court. So in that sense, I think and also their deep commitment to public service. I really do think that this story is one of really unmatched commitment. And the most amazing thing is to think of Edward Fairchild graduating from high school and going on to write 1,000 majority opinions on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Very complex opinions. It takes a good deal to read it. They are really unmatched, I think, as a family in terms of making public commitments, with the possible exception of Wilhelm, who certainly Edward had very little good to say about, who Tom followed very closely, I think, until the demise of the party when he chose wisely and became a Democrat. It was very interesting to see the unbroken line of public engagement politically as well. And it was a bit of a surprise to see exactly how liberal Tom was in the 50s, running sort of a campaign at that time took a lot of courage. And taking on the Truman loyalty oath at a time when Truman was president, he was running as a Democrat, I think was most unusual.
Did any of the letters between him and his father indicate any political?
There are almost no letters between him and his father in the Historical Society. I don't know if he chose not to. I mean, those two were virtually the only two. The first one, and then the one describing the Al Smith rally. Judge?
I've always been curious about how his demeanor when I knew him was very reserved and almost shy, it seemed like. And I have a hard time imagining him out, glad-handing people trying to get votes. Did you get any sense of his personality as a...
Only that this really was, I think, the favorite part of his life was when he was in politics. I think he really enjoyed what he learned from traveling through the state of Wisconsin, the difference between the various areas, the difference between people, meeting all those people. He certainly was not Bill Proxmire. I imagine the line moved a lot more quickly at the factory when he was shaking hands because the conversations were probably shorter. But he must have been able to really submerge his understated self to make those fiery political statements, particularly in the 52 election against McCarthy, where he talked about the Senate being transformed into cavalry. Pretty remarkable.
I think that, when he was, had his political career, I remember him talking about he had memorized every bus schedule in Wisconsin. And he knew he could remember the names of absolutely every politician and every little bird, who was the head of the Democratic Party, who the players in town were, and he just had this, phenomenal memory, but obviously he cherished that.
Well, the other remarkable story is this group of veterans and federal workers who just transformed the Democratic Party in a very short period of time. And certainly that was a defining moment for Tom Fairchild. His work with Jim and Ruth Doyle. Ruth Doyle I had the good fortune of knowing quite well, and she was just remarkable. She was the one woman in that group who was a member of the Young Turks and actually succeeded in elective office and held the post of some leadership. It was really something to see. It was fun to go back over all this and find all these photographs. Well, before you go, and you don't have to stay if you're not interested in hearing it, it was a little long to put in the talk, but I have Edward Fairchild describing in his own words.
Well, I always had one thought I'd like to be a lawyer. But when I graduated from high school, the first job I had was Well, even before I graduated, I was working part-time with Danville, this is kind of a joke. I was working part-time with Danville Advertiser office. A.O. Bono was a fine gentleman, he was the editor of that paper. And I used to set type and run a hand press and run out and get some news. And then too, I had a little time keeping books for F.C. Walker, hardware merchant. Well, while I was in the newspaper business with Mr. Bono, Walker was going to have a sale of, if I remember now, of soapstones, some article anyway, that he was going to have a sale at 99 cents. And that's a fair price for soapstone. A lot of people nowadays don't know what soapstone was. So something the farmers used to heat up the stove down at night and put in bed and keep their feet warm. Well, anyway, it was a soapstone. And instead of the type, instead of 99, I misplaced the 19 upside down. So it was 69 cents instead of 79. Well, when the bills, we were running off some bills that were going to be passed, and a few of the bills had gone out. And Mr. Walker saw it. He came up to protest, of course, and we talked it over and what thing to do. And I said to them, well, we'll go out and collect those bills if we can, and you put the rest of your soapstones down cellar. After a while, we'll re-advertise them again. And whatever you lose in the meantime, I'll have to make up to you in some way. And then Bono said something about the importance of a printer being exact in details. And he said you've got to be precise in everything when you're dealing with other people. And he said, I think you're doing the right thing with Mr. Walker, but he said, I suggest now that you carry out your plan and study law.
He's got the same kind of laugh Judge Fairchild had, for sure. But there you get his true recollection of what happened. There is a remarkable oral history taken by the Historical Society of Edward Fairchild that's on reel-to-reel tape, but I got it digitalized. So, thank you for your attention. I ran over the time I know that you're supposed to run over, but I appreciate it.